And what a week for gold and silver. You know, when I recorded the Friday market wrap last Friday, I mentioned that last weekend may have been the last weekend where you could buy gold below $4,000 an ounce and silver below 50. And you know what? That may well have been the case because gold is now over 4,000. In fact, it hit a new all-time record high on Wednesday of 4,056-ish, I think is what I recall. Silver actually got above $51 yesterday and then touched $51 again today. Now, it had resistance up at that level. And in fact, yesterday, when silver gapped up to $51 here in New York, or New York hours, there was a big sell-off. Silver dropped back down below 49 after trading above 51. So there was a lot of people that sold the new high. Now, there was a lot of concern the prior day that silver would not get above 50 because the silver stocks actually were weak on Wednesday because I think traders were expecting a decline. And then when we got the huge gap up on Thursday, all those silver and gold stocks gapped way up. But then we got the sell-off from the higher level, and gold and silver stocks had one of their worst days of the year, maybe of the bull market. Silver stocks in particular, on a day that silver traded above 51 for the first time and closed above 49. It was still a strong positive close, just not above 50. You had a lot of silver stocks down, 5 to 8%. So they got clobbered. And again, that just shows you how nervous investors are and how quickly they run for the exits on any sign that, oh no, maybe there's a top, maybe there's going to be a correction. So far, nothing indicates to me that that is the case, especially considering the fact that silver recovered and closed really, I think, above $50 on the week. This is the highest daily close ever for silver. It's the highest weekly close ever for silver. I think the same for gold. This is the highest gold has ever closed a week. In fact, it's never closed above 4,000. And, now it's closed a week above 4,000, not just the day. And the gold stocks were actually down a bit, most of them. The GDX was down about 2.5% on the week, although the GDXJ managed to eke out a small gain on the week. But all of this was the result of the big drop that we had on Thursday. Now, you would have thought that maybe the gold and silver stocks would have recovered some of that drop today, but I think the overall carnage in the stock market prevented that from happening. The Dow had one of its worst days of the year, down about 880 points or so, 878 points. That was almost a 2% decline on the day. The Dow down 2.5% now on the week. The S&P, though, was down 2.7% today. Russell 2000 down 3%. Big down. The NASDAQ was down about 3.5% on the day, 2.5% on the week. In fact, the NASDAQ hit a new all-time record high today on the same day that it was down 3.5%. That is an outside reversal day. The NASDAQ took out yesterday's high and then not only took out yesterday's low, but closed below yesterday's low. And in fact, it did the same thing on a weekly chart. The NASDAQ took out the high from the prior week and then closed below the low from the prior week. So that is a bad sign for the NASDAQ that a bigger decline is coming. The catalyst for this decline was Trump getting tough on China. Earlier in the day, he posted on Truth Social that he was going to impose some serious tariffs on China in addition to the tariffs we already have. I guess he was preparing to get medieval on China, but we didn't even know the extent until after the close. And probably, I don't know, about a half hour or so after the U.S. stock market closed, Trump revealed that the new tariffs on China are another 100% in excess of the tariffs that are already in effect. There's now another 100% on top of that. And in addition, there's going to be export controls on what the U.S. exports to China, most likely, in computer-related stuff like NVIDIA stuff and all that, we don't want the Chinese to have those GPUs. So as a result, we got additional sell-off in the stock market after the close. But the biggest decline came in Bitcoin, which was already down. I mean, Bitcoin was down pretty big when the U.S. stock market closed. In fact, Bitcoin was down 5% on the week. Now, in contrast to gold being up 3% and silver being up 4.4% on the week. So again, this should put another nail in the theory that Bitcoin is digital gold. I mean, it's not even digital silver. It's got nothing to do with a precious metal. Bitcoin did not rally today. Gold and silver went up. Bitcoin went down. It went down just like the NASDAQ, only it went down more than the NASDAQ. So it is a risk asset. It is not a safe haven asset. It has got nothing to do with gold. But now Bitcoin is selling off even more. As I am recording this update, Bitcoin is around 113,000. Just before I started recording, Bitcoin was below 110,000. It was about 109,000 and change. When Bitcoin was down at 110,000, it was down 26% since it peaked in terms of gold in August. And based on where it is right now, it's maybe off not quite 25%. But Bitcoin is decidedly in a bear market priced in gold. And so I think that we have a lot more downside coming in Bitcoin and the NASDAQ. I mean, I don't know how far the NASDAQ's going to fall, if it's just going to be a correction or if it's going to be a bear market. We'll see. Clearly, there's been a lot of enthusiasm for tech stocks, and the valuations are at nosebleed territory. So anything could justify this. But of course, we know from the past with Taco, Trump, maybe he'll come out on Monday morning or Sunday night. If it looks like the stock market is really selling off, maybe he'll come out and say something that will reverse that decline. I mean, who knows? I'm sure whatever he does, his friends are going to have the inside information. In fact, I'm sure some of his friends knew exactly what he was going to, the news he was going to release today before he did it. And so they probably had an opportunity. So there may be a good buying opportunity for some of the friends of Trump in the stock market futures or in Bitcoin, Sunday, if, so that he can say something that might reverse the decline. But all of this highlights the reason that people need to own gold, the reason that people need to own silver. These are real stores of value. They represent actual precious metals that are scarce, naturally scarce, not a man-made construct. And they're scarce also in the sense that there are no real substitutes. If you need gold, you need gold. Gold is the only metal that has those particular properties. You don't need Bitcoin. There's thousands of other cryptos that basically can do whatever Bitcoin does. In fact, a lot of them do it better and faster and cheaper than Bitcoin. So it's not even really scarce in that sense because there's so many substitutes. They just have a different name. And of course, it's not scarce in the sense that each Bitcoin can be broken up into 121 million Satoshis. So there's the total supply, 100 million Satoshis. So there's 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis. Nobody needs to buy any particular quantity of Bitcoin. One Satoshi will do you, right? Or you could buy a few 100,000. There's enough for every man, woman, and child in America, or in the world rather, to have a few 100,000 Satoshis. But for all practical purposes, you can't break gold up into that tiny of a quantity. Because if you need gold, you need a specific amount of gold to do the job. A microscopic speck isn't going to do it. But for Bitcoin, you don't do anything with it anyway. So it doesn't really matter how many sats you have. And remember, Bitcoin is just an arbitrary bundle of Satoshis. They could have said that each Bitcoin doesn't have 100 million Satoshis. It has 10 million Satoshis, in which case there wouldn't be just 21 million Bitcoin. There'd be 210 million. Or they could have said each Bitcoin is 10 million or a million Satoshis rather. And then there'd be 2.1 billion of these things. They wouldn't seem that scarce if they had set it up that way, but it would be the exact same situation. But this is going to be another example of why Bitcoin is not a store of value. Because one of the frustrating things about the media coverage, because this week I saw more media coverage of gold than I've seen in a long time. And that's what made me think that, well, maybe we'll have a pullback because now the media is finally talking about gold. And that's possible, right? We may pull back. I wouldn't want to bet on it. And even if we get a pullback, I don't expect the pullback to be significant. I think there's too much buying that's going to be coming into the market for there to be that big of a pullback. And therefore, it doesn't make any sense to wait for one. It makes much more sense to do exactly on these market wraps every week, which is just buy.